who is joining us via Zoom. Can you say hi or wave to us for the president? That was Zoom, right? Let's wave to her. Let's see if she can see us. Good morning. Good morning, Ms. Hernandez. I want to officially welcome all of you to the 2021-2022 school year. Can you believe it? We are here. So if I can have all of you here in the audience, and maybe even those of you on YouTube, stand up and give yourselves a big round of applause. Welcome, everybody, to this incredible school year. For those of you who don't know me, I am your MC this morning. My name is Veronica Sanchez. I'm the Director of Communications and Community Engagement for a wonderful school district. I am caffeinated. I am ready for this school year. And again, I cannot stress enough how happy I am to see all of your faces. Admittedly, we had a rough year last year, but I think we came out as champions for our scholars and our families. And I know that speaking on behalf of our superintendent, our wonderful executive team, and our board members, in saying that we did a really incredible job considering the circumstances. So I'm very proud of all of you on YouTube, and I look forward to the newcomers this year because we're going to have an incredible school year. I want to start off this morning by introducing first and foremost a young man that I personally hired. He is our multimedia coordinator. His name is Bob Higley. He runs our brand new website. And just the other day, I found out that he is a classically trained singer. And he will be here this morning. He's here this morning, and he will be performing our national anthem. So for those of you here, can you please stand and give him a big round of applause?
Oh, Saint, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets rock, the bombs burst through the night, not a flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free?
Again, I just want to reiterate, I hired that young man. Incredible job. Thank you, Rod. And now it is my honor to introduce you to the greatest superintendent you'll ever have in your career. She really cares about our kids. She is a veteran, and she is very focused on our families and making them successful. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Leanne Aguilar-Roller.
And Brock, it's really hard to follow that. I'm very moved. You hear that song and no matter what's happening in the world, it just makes everything so much better. It's about who we are, and I just want to thank you for that. Welcome to the new school year. I did want to start by taking a moment of silence to honor and remember those in our staff and in our families who are no longer with us because of this past year. Not only the seriousness of the virus, but also loss that we've had. It's been a very sad and emotional year, and you will always be in our hearts and memories. Please, moment of silence. Thank you. To all of you in our amazing district office, I love being able to see you and thank you and celebrate with you. And to all of our schools and our annex and everyone out there today, we have much to celebrate. I want to start with thanking our educational services team and all our IT and B&O and all staff for your support and leadership in planning this conference. Will you join me in applauding our schools and here at the district office? I want to publicly honor and recognize the most incredible governing board a school district could ever ask for and a superintendent could ever ask for. Your dedication, support, and care has always been stellar, but over the course of the pandemic, you have been relentless. I know you are proud, as I am, of your school district community and all of our staff. The governing board and I, along with all the principals and assistant principals, directors, assistant directors, all administrators, have had the privilege of seeing the most incredible, hardworking, creative, caring, and passionate team. Our teachers, wow, you made distance learning a thing. We are so proud of you. Yes, let's celebrate. Our business services department, in the background, all the things that you did, payroll, they were here on holidays, they were here on weekends, all because they wanted to make sure that everybody who is working so hard got paid. Let's give them a huge hand. I learned that all staff, no matter the circumstances, and this was the hardest circumstance that I think anybody could have ever imagined. We came together to teach, to feed, to test, to counsel, to transport, to connect, to procure and order supplies, to deliver, to communicate, to listen, to love, to share, to celebrate, and most of all, to learn and be flexible. We even took time out of our busy schedules to star in a real-life documentary. Veronica and Spitali staff, Janet and Rosalinda, you make us all proud. This is our district. This is Cartwright. Really incredible. Let's give a hand to Spitali staff and Dr. And I'm not sure what's going to happen with this new COVID-19 variant, but I take great pride in knowing that We will continue to get through this safely, together, as one team, una familia. I wish you all a great day of learning today and the most memorable school year ever. Thank you.
I now want to publicly acknowledge our wonderful governing board team, those that are here in attendance and those that are not. First off, Board President Denise, thank you for joining us. Vice President Denise Garcia, stand up. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the great work you do. I also want to give a shout out to our wonderful executive team members who are scattered around this room. Can you please stand so we can give you a big round of applause? Now to our incredible governing board president, Ms. Hernandez, who is here via Zoom. She is a tireless advocate for our scholars. You'll be seeing her very, there she is, rocking, girl. You will be seeing her often on our campuses because she is always active and participates in a lot of corporate events, so thank you for doing that. That is how much she cares about our scholars, our family, and our school community. Ladies and gentlemen, governing board president, Ms. Hernandez, with a brief message.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to the 2021-2022 Cartwright Elementary School District school year. We are so excited to have everyone here, and I'm sorry that this year I couldn't be there in person, but I definitely am happy to be here via Zoom, and that we, through the pandemic and our first round of COVID, became very intimately joined with our Zoom counterpart here. So it makes it possible to be in two places at one time, which is awesome. I want to say thank you and welcome to all of our new teachers for the year. Welcome to the Cartwright team and to all of our veteran teachers and returning teachers. We are so happy to have you back again as well. Please, the thing that I will ask you this morning is to wear your masks. We all need to be really safe. And if you thought that we were bold when we went through COVID #1, you better believe that in this new school year, we will be making some bold moves as well. We will do that together as we have been doing. And so your feedback is definitely appreciated. The other thing I wanted to say, this is a good place to let teachers know, the new teachers that are joining, that your Cartwright Education Association is a great resource to you. So if you like to be connected and you would like to have a voice at the table, definitely get in contact with your representative for Cartwright Education Association. Our president is Ms. Michela Stevens, and we are just very excited to have such a great partnership together. And the CEA is a loud voice that we listen to, and they work alongside your Cartwright executive team, superintendent, and governing board. And together we are one team, una familia. So definitely everyone, please stay safe. I miss being with all of you. I'm so glad that we're going back. We are going back in a time that's going to be a little, we're going to have some unknowns here. Things keep changing over the last couple of days. I'm sure you all have heard that, but definitely know that your superintendent and your governing board and the executive team will do all that we can to keep everyone safe and to have the best mitigation in place possible. So welcome to the 2021-2022 school year. I'm excited to see you all, and have a beautiful day and enjoy the conference. Thank you.
And I want to introduce our wonderful governing board vice president, Denise Garcia, who is here with us today. She will be introducing our keynote speaker, Madam Vice President.
We love you, Vice President.
She's such a brat.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I did call Ms. Hernandez a brat, I did. But she is a wonderful human being, and in order for us to make all of these changes and promoting and empowering everyone, it truly is a team effort. And again, with Dr. Aguilar Lawler, our board, our entire board, Madam President, and all of the stakeholders here, we could not be where we are today if it were not for you. So thank you. So this morning, I am here to introduce Mr. Brad Snyder. He is the Executive Director of the Initiative for Child Wellbeing and Bullying Prevention. The immediate past chair of the Arizona Adverse Childhood Experiences Consortium. Okay. Also, a member of the Arizona Governor's Council on Child Safety and Family Employment. Positions 3 decades of experience and children and adolescents. 1.2 contract network in the U.S. Justice Department. Experts describe the mindset
I think I'm good on the line here. I'm actually going to be telling a story from my book, which I don't really need to worry about you having read, according to my publisher and Amazon statistics. But it involves the Baker Act in Florida. I'm not sure you've been following the news, but it seems like every couple of days there's a new video that surfaces of a third grader, second grader, a first grader in Florida being taken out of a classroom in hysterics, not even being able to like have the handcuffs hold their wrist, but you watch these children hold the handcuffs on themselves because they're slipping off the wrists. And California has this law that allows that to happen. A lot of attention in those scenarios is paid to what is happening to that child. But I always think about what is happening to the teacher in that incident, because I was involved in something very similar to that back when I was working in schools as a counselor. Now, I'm an Arizona native, but for a long time I worked on the East Coast. And this incident took place in Boston in an inner city middle school. It involved a student named David, a 14-year-old. But David was no typical 14-year-old. He was about 6 feet 2 inches tall. And not the gangly 6 foot 2 inches tall that we've come to expect from some of our adolescents. He was fully built like a man at 14. Big shoulders, muscular, large. To add to his mystique, it was widely talked about in the school that David's family ran the Heath Street project down the street. Meaning they controlled the crime, they controlled the drugs there. As the kids called it, Heath Street, and his family ran it. But what's interesting about David is that, and despite the fact that he was undoubtedly the alpha at the school, he was incredibly mild-mannered, very respectful, didn't get involved in trouble at all. Which is why I was surprised when there was a note in my box, and that's how we did it back then. You got a note in your box if you were a counselor. There was an incident that you were being asked to look into. And the incident involved David. That surprised me. And it also involved Mrs. Smith. And that surprised me too. Mrs. Smith could not have been physically different from David. She had been teaching at that school for several decades. She was 5 foot nothing. Wispy, thin, short, white hair. The faculty loved her. The students loved her. She was one of those things, like I think in the field we say, she got it, right? So when I went and talked to her, I was both confused and she was confused too. I said to her, so tell me, what went on yesterday? What happened with David? She said, well, I asked him to do a problem on the board, and he didn't hear me. So I repeated it. And David stood up, grabbed his desk, and threw it across the room. Now, to help you with that visual a little bit, this is Boston. These aren't new flimsy IKEA desks. These are the old metal desks with the flip top lid, like the clamshell. They are big, they are heavy. He picked it up and threw it all the way across the room and walked out. And Mrs. Smith was terrified. And rightly so, right? She felt threatened. She felt powerless in that moment. So what was going on inside her at that time? Well, what was going on inside her is best described by an analogy that my colleague Nadine Burke-Harris uses about these very old, biological, and predictable responses that humans go through when they encounter real danger. And she uses the example of the bear. Humans evolved such that if we were to encounter a bear in the woods, our bodies would trigger a set of reactions. Not our mind, we don't think consciously about it, it's our bodies. The reactions trigger our sympathetic nervous system. Heart beats faster, lungs expand to take in more oxygen. Fuel goes to our muscles. An inflammation response is triggered. Our immune system kicks in. We haven't even been injured in our body because it is so amazing. It's already looking to heal wounds we don't already have. It is the fight, flight, or freeze response that we hear a lot about. But I think when we hear about it, we tend to kind of stop thinking about what that means and how beautiful it actually is. That our body, before we can even think about the danger, starts preparing for it, gets us ready to fight that bear off, to flee from it, or to curl up and take whatever punishment that bear is going to dish. Take that punishment so well, in fact, we're already healing ourselves before we have an injury. There's something else that fight, flight, or freeze response does as well. It shuts down our prefrontal cortex. Right? And you think about that prefrontal cortex. That prefrontal cortex is responsible for executive functioning. I know you all know what that means, but let's review it for just a minute. It shuts down that part of our brain that allows us to understand consequences, and allows us to think logically, that allows us to formulate short-term memories and access short-term memories. It even regulates some of our interpersonal skills. Right? And why does it do that? Now, we understand why we need fuel for our muscles, why we need to be able to fight off that bear. We understand why it's nice that we have an inflammation response going on, an immune system jacking up so that we can take those injuries. Why does this beautiful system also shut down our prefrontal cortex? Well, it turns out that it's not such a good thing for us to think about our odds of beating a bear. We don't want to be hampered by that. If you're like me and are a geek about statistics and you're calculating the statistics of beating the bear, you're already dead. The bear's already on top of you. He's already well fed. You don't want to be thinking about that. You want to be reacting. You want to be surviving in that moment. In that sense, it's pretty beautiful. And it turns out that spending some time in that state has some benefits. So when we go into that state and are allowed to relax out of it, there are physiological changes that occur to us that actually increase our likelihood of performing better in similar situations in the future. It increases our cardiovascular capabilities. The problem becomes when you're triggered too much, when that system is not given a chance to relax, when you spend too much time in what's known as that trauma-aroused state, it starts to become toxic because that system works this way. The more you encounter bears, the more your body starts looking for them, starts preparing for them. Again, it's kind of beautiful. If you are somebody that keeps encountering bears, well, first of all, move. There's just too many bears in your neighborhood. Find a different place to live. But if you're somebody that keeps encountering bears and those bears keep hurting you, then your body kicks in and says, look, I'm going to put us on high alert. Instead of going from here to fight the bear, I'm going to keep us right around here so that we're always on guard, always ready to take on that bear, right? So that we are always, and the other thing, you don't always see the bears when they're there. Sometimes it's a little bit too late. So I'm going to start identifying bears for you. I'm going to start pointing out things that might be bears. And the problem is that repeated triggering then starts to cause problems. Being in that trauma aroused or just being trauma sensitive starts to do things to a human. First of all, it can permanently change that prefrontal cortex for you. Or rather semi-permanently changed so that it is always just back down a little bit.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Snyder. If we can ask you to maybe, as much as you can, stay away from the podium. It's providing so much feedback to our YouTube people.
Oh, okay, absolutely.
I'm so sorry about that.
You can walk around anywhere. Stuff under this box.
My notes are over there, but that's okay. If you see me go over there, I'll be quiet, and then I will come right back. No, thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that.
It's the microphone.
Oh, it's the microphone.
Superintendent, I am bored. I see what you mean about solving problems. Look at that. That just happened in my immediate vicinity. So it can simulate. So if we've seen a lot of bears, if we keep seeing bears, if we keep getting hurt by bears, our system becomes trauma sensitive. And it undergoes some semi-permanent changes. Semi-permanent changes to our executive functioning area so that it might be always a little compromised, might be always a little less able to access short-term memories, a little less able to understand consequences. It's also the case that an overactivated immune system, remember that kicks in when you're about ready to fight that bear? If that's constantly activated, but there's no injuries for it to fix, it starts feeding on itself. And it results in people who experience these toxic level of trauma or adversity are much more likely to develop cancer, to have strokes, to have heart diseases. Not because of anything wrong with them or anything that they did, but because of things that happened to them. And finally, the buzz that people who are trauma sensitive describe, that constant anxiety, there's a bear lurking around the corner, creates substance abuse problems and other mental health problems. So there's real reasons why we want to stop you, why we want to stop all teachers from spending too much time in that trauma-aroused state. So what could Mrs. Smith have done? Could she have done things that made that situation turn out differently? Maybe. It's really complicated. Our ability to mitigate the effects of adversity, to take on that stress, our ability to distinguish real bears from fake ones or imagined ones is dictated by many things. Our health, for example. If we're sick, if we're compromised in some way, we lose, with our physical health, we lose some of our ability to take on those kinds of adversities. They have all of our faculties at play when we're doing that. If we're already experiencing some depression, some other mental health issues, if we're already prone to anxiety, our ability to take on a new anxiety, a new adversity is diminished. Our family histories may dictate how well we take on adversity, how well we react when we're encountering bears. Because some of that trauma response, if we are a trauma-sensitive individual, if we've experienced toxic levels of trauma, we can pass that along to our children epigenetically. And that propensity for that reaction, for that trauma sensitivity, can get passed to us genetically from our parents and from their parents and from their parents' parents. And some of us come from cultures that have experienced historic trauma. Our ethnicity, our race, our religion has experienced this kind of adversity at toxic levels for a long time. It's been passed down to us. Nutrition will impact our ability to handle that anxiety, to deal with that kind of adversity, whether or not Mrs. Smith had a good breakfast, whether or not she just was all jacked up on sugar. All of those things are going to factor into her ability to handle that situation. And that's related to her physical fitness. How is her cardio system built already? Does she have a healthy cardiovascular system? If so, then the stresses placed on it by new adversity, by new anxiety, aren't going to seem as great. Moreover, she'll have greater control over her natural cortisol, and she's less likely to experience anxiety that way. And that gets to just the knowledge of our own bodies. How well do we understand our own bodies and what's good for them, what causes them to be compromised, what causes them to be sensitive? Have we been taught these things? Our relationships. Are we getting support, and do we feel that support from our colleagues, from our partners, from our friends? When we face adversity, we actually draw on that. It's a really interesting science, how as humans, we can know that other people support us even if they're not around. It gets taught to us at very young ages, and it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. The strength of our friendships, even when those friends aren't there, the strength of our relationship with our colleagues, even when our colleagues aren't there, will determine how well we're able to take on an adversity. They determine how well Mrs. Smith can react in a situation like that. Related to that is our community connections. We experience relationships in kind of two ways. We experience them as individual, feeling supported, valued, helped by certain individuals, feeling that we have worth, and that they see us as being valuable and having worth, but we also experience them communally. We can tap into a larger community and look at that belonging for strength when we encounter adversity. Is Mrs. Smith part of a strong community? Does she have a strong religious or ethnic or community identity that informs how she thinks about her own history, how she thinks about situations, how she thinks about kids, how she thinks about moving forward? All of those things will contribute to her ability to take on a bear. And finally, we, as educators, as teachers, we're impacted by the state of our students. How our students are presenting themselves impacts our own feelings and our own ability to take on adversity. Their health, their mental health, their demeanor, all impact yours as educators. An interesting thing is that how, and I mentioned this before, how these things impact our ability to take on adversity, it's not stored in our minds. We can't think about it. These are things that are stored in our bodies. Our bodies are what remembers the trauma. Our bodies are what remembers the bears. Our bodies are what tells us if there's another bear in our environment. So, to mitigate the effects of health, mental health, of our family histories, we need to understand our bodies. To increase the likelihood of seeing bears, we need to have strong relationships. We need to have strong community connections. We need less stressful environments in order to take on individual challenges. We are impacted by the larger stress in the environment, and that impacts how we deal with an individual stressor, an individual incident of adversity. And finally, in order to understand the effect our students are having on us, we need to understand our students. So how do we do that? How do we, as educators, how do you, as people in the Cartwright School District, how do you stop and mitigate the effects of toxic adversity? How do you stop yourself from seeing too many bears? How do you prevent those lifelong mental and physical consequences of being trauma aroused and being triggered too often or too frequently? Well, it's social emotional learning, or SEL, and an understanding of ACEs and trauma-informed practices. I'm going to take a sidebar here for just a moment, because that's one of those needle scratchers I find, like that wah, wah, wah. Brad's leading up to this big story, and you just said ACEs and you just said SEL, and that's kind of really boring. And so I'm going to turn off for a moment, but stick with me for just a moment. I don't want to talk about SEL or trauma-informed practices. What I want to talk to you about right now is the posters that are up in your schools. Think about that. Think about the posters that are on the walls of your school. If I were in a classroom, if I were in an actual school giving this lecture, I would look at those posters, but just for now, picture them. What are they? Do you have a poster up maybe about bullying prevention? Do you have a poster up about your bearing and how you're supposed to walk in the hallways? Because what I want you to do now is think about what was under that poster. Our schools have limited wall space. My guess is whatever poster is up now covered up a poster that was up there last year or 2 years ago. And my guess is that underneath that bullying prevention poster might be a nutrition poster. Something about childhood obesity, maybe. Maybe under that poster, you have a poster, depending on the age that you deal with, maybe you have a poster about substance abuse prevention. Maybe under that poster, you've got something about a reading initiative. Maybe under that poster, depending on the age again and how far back your school goes, you have something about gang prevention. I mention that because I am wholly aware that what we do with schools is pile on initiatives. We take and we're like, oh, okay, so we need our students to be better. We need the kids in the United States to have better nutrition. We'll give it to schools. We need the kids in the United States to not be as obese. We'll give it to schools. We need the kids in the school to not use drugs, despite the fact it's in their communities and it's endemic and it's related to things like employment. We'll give it to schools to solve. We layer stuff on top of each other. Hey, we're going to make our students take standardized tests that predict nothing and take time away from real education and growth. We're going to give it to schools. I'm here to tell you that SEL and trauma-informed practices are not those things. They are not another burden that you put on top, something else that you have to teach, another box that you have to check. Properly implemented, SEL and trauma-informed practices are going to make your lives easier. They're going to keep you healthier and make it easier for you to teach and more satisfied in your jobs. To understand that, I think it's useful to go back and to really take a look at what SEL is. You know, we live in this alphabet soup. It's part of our profession, maybe more so than any other profession that I've encountered. These initials come at us and they're always brand new ones, except sometimes they're not. They're just using new initials, and that really upsets me. And believe me, I'm as susceptible to this as anybody. I'm immersed in the research, and yet anytime somebody says something like, well, did you look at MTSS or did you look at ACEs? Or I'm like, no, don't give me initials. Just tell me what it is. I don't want to hear it again. And don't give me something else to learn. I'm just figuring out the last thing you gave me to learn. But let's take a look at SEL, because SEL has gotten to be just an initialism, void of meaning. We think it's something that we have to do, but what actually is it? SEL is a process by which humans can learn to regulate their emotions. It is a process by which humans can learn how to form and maintain relationships. It is a process by which humans can learn to understand a different person's perspective, the perspective of the other, which they can empathize. It is a process by which humans can learn how to make responsible decisions. It's not a course. It's not biology, it's not history, it's not math. All of those skills are used in every aspect of your life, in every aspect of your student's life. And what about ACEs and trauma-informed practices? Under ACEs and trauma-informed practices, that's about understanding the causes of trauma, both individual and historic, and how those traumas affect how humans, how your students interact with the world. And they are a set of strategies that you can employ in order to stop that kind of adversity from being toxic, to prevent it from having the lifetime ill consequences that they're capable of having. SEL and trauma-informed practices help us recognize when our students are susceptible to seeing bears. It teaches us, SEL, for example, teaches us and our students how to regulate our emotions, how to respond. It teaches us what our emotions are so that we can respond appropriately to them. This is a really interesting thing about humans, it turns out. It turns out that in order for us to respond appropriately to an emotion we're feeling, we have to understand it. We have to know it. We have to label it, it turns out. Before we do that, unless we're given an opportunity to understand these emotions, we go through life in this very black or white way. I feel good, I feel bad. When I feel bad, I want to feel good right away, and I'll do whatever I can to feel that way. When I feel good, kind of don't care. I'll just stay here. I'll stop you if you try to stop me from feeling good. But you know that there is this entire range of emotions, and that the anxiety that you might feel about being asked to do a problem on the board is different than feeling like your life is threatened. But we as humans can only make those kind of distinctions if we're taught how to examine our emotions, how to label them, how to respond appropriately, and SEL does that. It teaches us how to understand our students' emotional states as well as our own emotional states. As I mentioned, there are all of these things that impact our emotional states, our health, our mental health, our family history and connections, how well we've been taught to pay attention to our bodies, our physical fitness, our nutrition, the safety of our environment, the other people around us. Those absolutely impact how you interact with the environment. They impact how your students interact with it too. Your students' health, their mental health, their family histories and connections, their sense of community connectedness, the overall safety of the environment that they're in. That is all impacting their ability and how they might react as well. That has its own acronym, by the way. It's called WISC, the Whole School, Whole Child, Whole Community Initiative. It labels those different pillars. Trauma-informed practices teach us the physical signs to look out for so that we can know if we are susceptible to a trauma reaction or if our students are. And just think about that. If Mrs. Smith, well, what we know about Mrs. Smith is she absolutely felt unsafe. She absolutely felt that she was without control of the situation. She felt in danger and powerless. But how did David feel? You know, her story is that she didn't hear him, that he didn't hear her the first time he asked her to go to the board. How would that situation have resolved differently if she had a basis in SEL? If she knew how our environments can make us more or less sensitive to a reaction, if she knew the physical warning signs to look out for, it could very well be that going up to that board and doing that problem at that time put David in danger. Or at least it seemed like a bear to him. For all those reasons that a public failure can seem very real and very dangerous to adolescents, especially an adolescent with status like that. She might have been able to recognize that he had was exhibiting some of the physical features of entering a trauma-aroused state, clenching up, shortness of breath, standing very still. These things might have taught her, oh, he heard me. It's just not his time to go to the board right now. And I'm not suggesting that we're letting David off. I'm suggesting that Mrs. Smith needs to protect herself. That she needs to stop herself from being triggered and traumatized. That she needs to do what she can do to keep in control of her own faculties for her own health. It absolutely benefits the students. It absolutely would have benefited David. David learned nothing from that exchange. He doesn't remember that exchange. Why? Prefrontal cortex shut off. He has no short-term memories from that moment. He remembers being asked a question. He remembers being out in the hallway later. Mrs. Smith doesn't remember a lot of it either. There was no learning that occurred. The other students remember a lot of that. Some of them were triggered. So how would it have resolved differently if she had been able to recognize those signs? How would it have resolved differently if David had been able to recognize his own signs? The SEL you're teaching absolutely benefits you, but it's not just about you recognizing these physical signs in your students. Your trauma-informed practices are not just about you recognizing the propensity for a trauma reaction in your students or in yourself. It's about helping your students recognizing it themselves so that you don't have to, so that they can control it. How would it have resolved differently if David could have looked, hey, I'm clenching, my heart rate is up, I'm ruminating. This isn't right. This is just in a classroom. There's no bear here. There's no bear here. Also, SEL and trauma-informed practices help us access help when we think we are seeing a bear, or when we think we might see a bear. As I mentioned, SEL teaches us how to express emotions and how to connect with others for help. You know, it is a really interesting thing about humans. We need relationships. We are born needing relationships without any idea how to have them or how to communicate our emotional or relationship needs. So we know that we need them. The science is crystal clear on this. All of the social science about longevity, about the health of humans, is coming around one central figure, which is one central point, which is humans that have strong relationships live longer and are healthier. We need them. We have no idea how to form them or maintain them. We are born without that knowledge. We have to learn it. We learn it first from the primary care providers in our environment. But sometimes we're raised in environments and by people that weren't really good at maintaining or obtaining relationships themselves. Sometimes those relationships that we experienced in our earliest years weren't healthy, but they were the only models that we had. So we brought them into the world with us. We brought them into the schools with us. They're not working, but they're the only thing we have unless we have SEL, unless there's a vehicle for us to learn better relationship skills. And I don't know about you, but it's, for me, I can always get better at my relationship skills. It's a learning that doesn't stop. It's something that goes on over the course of a lifetime. Trauma-informed practices, then, in addition to helping us understand the warning signs that we are thinking there's a bear nearby and that we're in danger. And understanding of ACEs and trauma-informed practices give us tools and techniques to bring us out of those states. Some of them are things like mindfulness, which again is another one of those, oh, he just said mindfulness. He already looks like a hippie. He just lost me. But mindfulness, in the scientific definition of it, is merely understanding your body's response, the physical biological response to your environment, so that you can control it. Because again, it's not happening in conscious thought. You're not consciously saying, I think I'm going to go look for bears today. Your body's doing that. But you can recognize when your body has started to do it. And there are techniques, mindfulness techniques, that you can employ to bring yourself out of that state. That sympathetic nervous system that puts you in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, that can be deactivated by this parasympathetic nervous system. You can do that. You can consciously do that. An understanding of ACEs and trauma-informed practices give you and your students the skills to bring themselves out of those states so that they can maintain learning, so that they can avoid those toxic levels of stress. Also, because when you're in a trauma-aroused state, remember I said that prefrontal cortex shuts down? There are ways to bring you out of that state. Restraint is not one of them. Okay? In fact, if you are somebody that sees your environment as dangerous, having somebody restrain you, if you're somebody that's feeling powerless, and by the way, being in a trauma-aroused state is exactly how it feels. That feels powerless. You feel out of control. Something is happening to you, it's threatening you, it's gonna hurt you, and you feel powerless. Being restrained in that instance only confirms what your body is telling you. That the community around you, the world around you is dangerous. Body said, see, I told you somebody was going to try to like lock you up. I told you somebody was going to try to hurt you. I told you there was something here that was going to rob you of all your power. But there are ways to bring somebody out of that trauma-aroused state. And those are techniques that you can learn from trauma-informed practices, the kind of practices that are available to you here in Cartwright. But I'll give you a quick example from one that we use in teaching law enforcement. So some of my colleagues in the Arizona Adverse Childhood Experiences Consortium have been working with police departments around the valley, mostly with the city of Tempe. We want to do more work in Phoenix. And we hear these complaints from officers that are trained for compliance, right? So they see somebody threatening people around them, holding a machete, brandishing it, threatening people in his environment. And the cop comes up and says, I need you to do this now. I need you to get down, put that down. Compliance. But when we talk to them, we find out, we dig a little deeper, we find out that what they really want is not compliance. They don't actually care that the person is laying down. What they want is for the people in that person's environment not to be in danger. They want that threatening behavior to stop. Think about your classrooms, and sometimes when you've got an unruly student, do you want them to just sit down and be quiet, or do you just want them to stop being disruptive? Because those are two different things. The compliance that police officers were asking for, wasn't working for them. Their words, not mine. And they were being forced to do things they didn't want to do. Because if you give an all or nothing mandate, and the person doesn't comply, you are not left with many options. But if they're dealing with a perpetrator that's in a trauma-aroused state, what do we know? Do they understand consequences? Part of their brain has been shut down. They don't get it. They feel powerless. They feel in danger. They don't understand reasoning. But this is what our officers were asking them to do. So what we've taught officers to do is to empower in ways that stop the situation and have the whole thing resolved without violence. I'll give you a quick example. You've got somebody brandishing that machete and they're threatening people around them. Now police officers are trained to say, I need you to stop what you're doing now because you're making these people over here scared, you're putting them in danger. You can go sit down over here or you can go stand over there. Those two places are okay. It's your choice. You still have to stop what you're doing. You can't keep doing that. That's dangerous. But here are two things you can do. By giving somebody a choice, somebody who feels powerless, all of a sudden they start to come out of that state a little bit because now they have a little bit of power. And that's an example from policing in very dangerous situations where they can resolve it without the use of deadly force because they don't want to have that exercise deadly force. They don't want to go home with that feeling. They want people to be safe. They want to do their job. As teachers, we're the same way. Think about, as I mentioned, I'm haunted by how Mrs. Smith felt when she went home that day after David acting that way. She believed that she was worthless. She believed that she was a bad teacher. Those feelings lasted for a long time. If she had an understanding of where he was, even if it didn't change the outcome, if she gained an understanding of her student through SEL, through an understanding of ACEs and trauma-informed practices, at the very least, she could have said, oh, it wasn't me. I let it bear in the room, but it wasn't, I didn't do, it was him, something, his body, because of things that had happened to him. And finally, most importantly, SEL and trauma-informed practices can prevent us from seeing bears. SEL sets a code of conduct that supports healthy relationships. The curriculum that you have available to you talks about these very explicit messages and these code of conducts about what students should do. And it turns out they work. You know that phrase, well, you should have known better? I know that phrase because it was said by my mother about me many, many times as a child. You should have known better. But how? How do our students know better unless they are told? I'm going to borrow another example from another colleague. I thought it was quite clever. He said that he was on his way to the speaking gig and he had MapQuest open up. MapQuest, because I'm just that old. He had Google Maps up on his phone. And he was driving to the venue and he made a turn and the Google Map says, don't turn here. Got back on the road, went a little bit further, made another turn. Google Map said, don't turn here. Went a little further. Google Maps said, don't do that. Don't turn here. I mean, it's like, stop telling me what I'm not supposed to do. Tell me where I'm supposed to go. Okay, that never really happens. But just think about that for a moment. We as humans are better at doing what we're told to do. It's more rewarding, it's more relaxing than we are at being told that what we just did was wrong. That's at the foundation of PBIS, but it's also a set of skills that are enforced and taught through SEL. Do your students know how they're supposed to treat each other? I know they're very aware of how they're supposed to stand in lines in some of your schools, how they're supposed to make eye contact. They know how they're supposed to feel about one another. What kind of behaviors, what kind of positive behaviors are rewarded? What are those structures like? SEL will teach us that. And they're explicit. And this is, I think you can tell that between working in schools and being able to come back and work in schools like I am now, I spent a lot of time in policing and in prison reform, working mostly with juvenile prisons. And we had a big problem with assaults on staff and restraint use in many juvenile prisons in the United States. Restraint use resulting from youth assaulting other youth and youth assaulting staff. And we brought that number down. You know how we did it? We told them not to. We created a code of conduct for juvenile prisons and juvenile detention centers, and it said inmates don't assault each other and inmates don't assault staff. We posted that up on the walls. This is how you're supposed to behave. You treat each other with respect. You treat these officers with respect. They treat you with respect. You don't assault each other. That's the only thing we did. And we brought down assaults. I know that seems obvious. I know that seems like a little thing, but we're tapping into a very rich psychological literature about humans doing what they're told to do and being less likely to do things that they're not told to do. Do you want your students to treat each other with kindness? Where is that sign? Where is that code of conduct? Do you want them to treat you with respect and kindness? Where is that sign? Do you want them to be thinking about what you might be going through? Where is that poster, that sign, that code of conduct? Where do they get lessons on how to do that? That's from SEL. That's from trauma-informed practices. Right? There are 6 principles of trauma-informed practices, by the way. The first is that you must establish safety, because that is what being in a trauma-aroused state feels like, that you're not safe. So do your students feel safe? Are they told that they're safe? And I know, again, that telling them that they're safe, that seems odd. In all scientific approaches to deregulation, to helping students regulate, to de-escalation, the first thing you do to de-escalate somebody who is in a trauma-aroused state, let them know they're safe. This has been studied. The science is clear on this. Let them know they're safe. And I know it seems counterintuitive unless you understand ACEs and trauma. When you understand that, because this person is threatening, David was scary when he was holding that desk. Super scary. Mrs. Smith had every right to be terrified. But if she understood trauma and trauma-informed practices, she might have recognized that he didn't feel safe. And that she could have made herself feel safe by helping him feel safe. It works. Second principle of trauma-informed practices is consistency, trustworthiness, transparency. How much do you like it when you get pulled into a meeting you didn't know you had? When you're in the middle of a task, right? How much do you like it when you set up this day, this is Thursday, Thursday's my day, I'm gonna crank through that pack, that pile, I'm gonna get done, I set it aside, and you get pulled into a meeting. Or you get to go in and somebody says, oh, you have a new supervisor, you have a new role. How much do you like being surprised by that? People who are trauma sensitive, that can be incredibly triggering. That can be incredibly triggering to you. That lack of transparency, that lack of consistency. Your students feel it too. Maybe sometimes more acutely. Pulling a student out of a class, not telling them why in the middle of the class, even if it's for a good reason, well, you might have to be on your best SEL trauma-informed skill set there because you're likely to trigger that person. Did you need to do it then? Did you give them a warning? Did you told them the day before? Because again, It is about their reaction, but you have to deal with their reaction. So these practices are absolutely about making a better environment for them, but it's a better environment for you. If you insisted, hey, don't pull any kids from my class unless you give me warning. Tell me at the beginning of class, if this is the only time it can happen, okay, let me prepare them. Then you're not dealing with a kid that's acting up because something's happening to them that they have no control over, that feels very dangerous, very foreign. That's why it's promoted by SAMHSA as a trauma-informed practice. That's why it works. That's why it'll work for you and not just for your students. That consistency, that trustworthiness, that transparency, it also means that when they move from class to class, when they move from program to program, that they're using the same language across those programs, those classes, for the same behaviors. That those teachers are responding to the same behaviors with the same things. It is disruptive, potentially dangerous, harder for you to manage when a student goes from this program, but they need extra help, so they go across town to another program that uses completely different language for behavior that you're seeing in this program. It doesn't work. It's not me saying that, it's the science saying that. Consistency is incredibly important. It is your ally in creating environments that prevent you and your students from seeing bears. When a student knows what to expect, they feel less anxious. They're not looking for bears when they move from this program to this, from this classroom to this. They know what's going to happen. They know how they're going to be responded to. They know how to ask questions. They know how to seek help. Peer support is the third of the 6 principles of creating a trauma-informed environment. Your students are your biggest allies in helping the behaviors of all of your students. You are going to always have students that have a difficult time modeling your behaviors, doing what you've instructed them to do in a positive way. The person that we most want to learn from, it's known as the more knowledgeable other. It's a person who's a lot like us. There's a lot of reasons why that is psychologically. If you have a skill or you have something of value, a status that I want, a skill that I want, and you're a lot like me, well, I'm better able to get instruction from you because we're alike, we share a language. We understand the same analogies. There's nothing lost in that communication. More importantly, if you're somebody that has something that I want, a skill, a status, and you're a lot like me, then I believe I can do it too. What SEL teaches, what trauma-informed practices teach, is not that we are focused on an individual, we're creating an environment. And yes, there are going to be students that struggle, that are acting because they've experienced more trauma than other students, because they were exposed to an unhealthy model of relationships. They're going to struggle more. But you don't focus on them exclusively. You get everybody adopting these principles. And they learn those principles from their peers. Just like your peers learn it from you. There's a huge percentage of you that turned me off right away when I started talking. I get it. I've been through many, many lectures too. It's not how I learn, ironically. And so there's a lot of you that did that. But those people that turned me off, they're going to listen to you. They're going to follow your example. They're going to see the success that you have with the same students in your classroom with these principles. And if you can convert them, then you're going to have more success, because when they come from that class to you, from that grade to your grade, the students are going to be experiencing, have the same skills, using them the same ways. They complement what you're doing in that classroom. Collaboration and mutuality, one of the ways for transparency is to involve students in what's happening for them, letting them know, asking them what they think should be done. It's interesting when this gets studied, especially around issues of things like restorative justice, or when we start to look at consequences. Oftentimes when we involve the students in telling us what they think should be done, they come up with responses that are kind of more complicated, sometimes more burdensome than what we would have. And yet, because it's partially theirs, they learn more from those experiences. Also, that mutuality, that collaboration keeps them from feeling powerless, keeps them from being triggered, so that they can learn, so that they can grow. The final two principles of creating trauma-informed environment have to do with empowerment and voice and cultural competency. Understanding where we come from, what our triggers are, how our culture, how our race, how our ethnicity, how our religious or identity have taught us to react in an environment, have taught us what to expect in an environment. It's really important. Understanding that in our students as well, incredibly important to understand how this situation might impact this section differently than this one. The big examples are things like, how we talk about Thanksgiving might impact our Indigenous kids differently than it impacts on kids who aren't. There's countless situations in our class, topics that we are told to teach that were experienced differently by different members of our student body. Understanding that can help us prevent them from feeling anxious or triggered in those subjects. I think you'll notice that I didn't impart a ton of concrete skills today. I apologize for that. These topics that we're talking about, SEL, behavior management, ACEs, trauma-informed, these are not topics that can be taught in a single 50-minute session. These are topics that take a long time to learn, and they are person and grade specific. SEL instruction scaffolds starts with preschool, and it grows, expanding with the developmental stages of our students. So do trauma-informed practices, helping a kindergartner understand their state is very different than helping an adolescent. But that wasn't my goal today, was to talk about like concrete steps. My goal was twofold. My goal was to let you know that SEL, ACEs, and trauma-informed are not about making this situation, this experience, better for students. They undoubtedly do. The science is crystal clear. Implementing a strong SEL program, implementing an understanding of ACEs and trauma-informed practices absolutely benefits students. Their grades will go up, there'll be fewer office referrals, all of that. But my goal today was to let you know it benefits you. And that's okay. It's okay, maybe, to start embracing these programs that your district is doing, these resources that your district has. You have great SEL resources. You have great ACEs and trauma-informed resources at the district level. It's okay. I'm letting you know it's okay for you to access them, because it's going to make your job easier. We know that in environments that have successfully created positive school environments through these initiatives, staff satisfaction is higher, staff turnover is lower. It will benefit your students, but it's okay that it benefits you too. I'm very grateful for the time that I was given to talk to you today. I'm very impressed by the work that you've done and that you continue to do. I know exactly how difficult it is in the best of circumstances that you had to undergo a pandemic and teaching a population that some people have not paid enough attention to. So you have my respect, you have my support, and again, I'm very grateful for this time. Thank you.
SEL and wonderful storytelling. We appreciate you being here. Can we give them another round of applause? That concludes our welcome and the keynote sessions will begin at 9:30. So that's a few minutes. Please make sure you double check your schedule and you will have the correct Zoom call. We want to make sure that you are 100% prepared for this next school year. And as we have all heard this morning, Armando is one team in Familia, and we're going to have an incredible year as a family meeting. You being here this morning, and I look forward to seeing you this year. Have a good one.